Right place. We are going to begin in prayer and then we'll start. So, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Holy, mighty, loving, and eternal God, we give you thanks for this day where your mercies have met us afresh. We are aware of them renewed. God, I pray for this time. Give thanks for Betsy and Yah for joining me on this journey on what it means to witness to you who are reconciling all things to yourself. So Lord, send down your Holy Spirit to be in this conversation. Be gentle, be wise, we speak with truth, witness to our faith, be called as people who walk in love. Amen. My name is Mitchell, and I am a seminarian at Virginia Seminary, and I'm also the interim youth director here at St. Columba. And I am joined by two of my really dear friends, Betsy, who is the head chaplain at Episcopal High School, and my friend and colleague, Yah Addison, who is also at seminary with me, and has accepted a call to be one of the associate directors at Grace High School in Silver Spring.
Yes.
So, I would love to start with introductions, and particularly around your social location as who you are.
Well, as you heard, I am Yah. I am from the DC area. I'm an African American woman, cisgender woman who has been predominantly educated in the Episcopal school education system. I went to Lowell School, and then I ended up at St. Patrick's Episcopal School, which is in Bar here. And that is also how I ended up becoming involved in the Episcopal Church and joining the church. And then I found myself at St. Andrew's over in Potomac. And then to Gettysburg, and had some interesting experiences along the way. One of the most significant things for my identity is I'm a coach, or was a coach. I coached for almost 10 years, starting in college, and then even while I was in seminary at Episcopal High School. And so that is really the way that I find I interact with kids the most. I was also the receptionist for the front office at St. Andrews for a number of years. And so that was also where I came to a lot of my contact.
Betsy Carmody. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, but I shouldn't say that. I grew up in Mountain Brook, Alabama, which was a white flag suburb outside of Birmingham, and grew up with very little diversity. We did not bus as a school, and so we had maybe 2 black students in my entire school, and full of Asian students. I was really desiring diversity and wanted to go away and actually did a lot of Episcopal youth work in the Diocese of Alabama. And, as we say, Sunday can be the most segregated day of the week. That was definitely true in my experience in going to church and going to camp. And then went away to Northwestern, thought about being a priest in high school, but then said, I'm going to go be a journalist. And so did that and moved to DC in 1999. And my mom said, I know you want to work with young people. And she was in seminary at the time. She said, don't come to St. John's, Georgetown. They're going to make you the youth minister. You need to go to St. Columbus. And I'm like, they have a full-time paying youth minister, so it won't be you. And I'm like, oh, great. So I started attending church here in 99, 2000. Was a part of the first group of teachers doing Right 13 and J2A when we were doing that curriculum here. And now the children that I've taught are, having children of their own, which is very freaky. But this was a really formative place for me. My daughter Ruby was baptized here, but I answered a call to go to seminary, went out to the West Coast, seeking just different places to be and different people to be in contact with and to be pushed on in different ways. And then when I graduated from seminary, I said I really want to work with young people. And the Bishop Chain, who was the bishop at the time, said, well, there are 2 school chaplaincy jobs open. So I started working at St. Andrews. Yana and I were like ships in the night. She just graduated. I showed up, was the lower and intermediate school chaplain, just saw one of my little students walking around here this morning, and loved that for 4 years, but missed working with high school students. So I returned and found, I didn't know Episcopal High School existed. Had no idea, right? That there's this, 450 kid campus of all borders in Alexandria, Virginia, and so applied and became assistant chaplain for 2 years and head chaplain for, now this is my 7th year in that position. And so that's really how, I'm living, working, I live on a dorm with 40, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade female students. It is camp 24/7, your congregation never leaves. Like, it's great. We actually went on spring break, so this is the end. I'm spending the end of my spring break with you all, so this is perfect. But it is sacred and holy work, and it's where I feel called to be. I think as long as my energy lasts, but it's been a very interesting 9 years.
And I'm Mitchell. I am from Greenwood, South Carolina, out of the Diocese of Upper South Carolina. I grew up going to a predominantly black church, particularly in the Baptist tradition, and then my parents moved. My older brother and I to a charismatic church that was kind of intercultural. High school, I started going to Young Life, which is this parachurch ministry that is particularly pretty white-centric. And then within that, I started going to a white evangelical megachurch. So I found myself, after I graduated with my 2-year degree, I was looking for a job, came across the Episcopal Church, was looking for a youth minister, applied, got the job. Again, found myself being formed in the Episcopal Church, which is a white space, particularly in the Deep South. And through that, sense a call towards ordained ministry. And that's how I got to BTS, and I got here. So I have 2 more questions, and then we're going to open it up for everyone to ask us questions and engage in dialogue. Before we get to the witness of kids, I'm curious what, during 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, what was your Christian witness in general during that time as a black woman and as a white woman?
My witness was that every person is beloved. That you are loved by Christ no matter what your identity is, especially when those identities are challenged. As an African American woman in a predominantly white church, it is a little difficult. You do get overlooked. You do have assumptions made about you. But I know that I am beloved. And so when I see others who have that identity challenge, I try to remind them that they too are beloved, that they are mirrors of God, that they are made in God's image. And so that is what they should hold on to, especially that identity, which is hard, especially when the world does try to challenge that. Also that, you can only do as much as you can do, and it's okay. It's okay to put your mask on first and then take care of other people along the way. If you are not okay in yourself, then how can you take care of someone else? And so remembering that, we find our strength in God and we follow Jesus' example.
I really didn't know anything. I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't really know a lot. And, I'm a Gen Xer. We were going to solve climate change, racism, like all those things, right? All while wearing Birkenstocks again. And, that's the identity I had. Like I've been doing like diversity work, intentionally trying to find that since I was a high schooler. And it was this realizing that I've just been at the outer edge of the onion on this year the whole time. And that navigating that in a school context, navigating that during the pandemic, I didn't have my people there. I had the immediate community. 94% of the adults that work at Episcopal live at Episcopal. So we were suddenly in this smaller environment, but all the students were away. And so you have the Black VHS account, all these things to kind of be and engage with the complicated history that my school has, that this parish has. Like, how do you start talking in real ways about the antebellum period, about priests owning slaves? How do I then take that all the way back to the way I distanced myself growing up in Alabama? That my family didn't live here during that time. Like, we moved here in the 70s, right? But to still be called out by the letter to the Birmingham jail and Bishop Carpenter, the Episcopal bishop at the time, still being not necessarily called out, but called in is what I think that letter is doing. And realizing that I had a lot of work to do personally because I suddenly did not trust my gut and I didn't feel ready to be the best that I could be for the students that were under my care, the adults. I think a lot of adults started telling more truth, especially adults of color in my community, than they have before. And we would stand out in front of Episcopal every Thursday from 4 to 5 with signs of support, spaced 6 feet apart, not blocking the sidewalk, and we'd just be out there like the whole summer. That's what we ended up doing, because some of it was we didn't have our kids. And for me, it came to being in a place like I was talking about, that all of us are seen and loved and made by God. And we have to treat each other with that dignity. We often, even though we're not a baptismal community, we use baptismal covenant language. Respect the dignity of every community, and that is who we are. But then also being a place where my congregation is young, and they screw up. They say things they shouldn't say. They get recorded and then it's posted on social media or whatever it is. Like, you making that mistake, how do you work with a 14-year-old boy who has said something that he said? He now, with some restorative justice angles in education, kind of sees how do we bring him back into the community, right? As just a general example. But I think I found myself dealing with it not only as a parent, but as a priest and educator. And so when you have my then child who's in 7th grade at the time, what do we do with that? So it became a lot more conversation, and again, more, I don't really know exactly what I'm doing. And I've got to read, I've got to study, I've got to talk to people, but not make them recount their pain for me as a white person to be able to understand what's going on. And that's always my concern. I know we're moving forward, I know my community is changing, I know I'm changing. To build out of the backs of my Black colleagues and Black students, or other students and colleagues of color, that can't be the solution.
Yeah, for me, my witness was really a lot of anger. I remember I ended up writing, I can't remember the last thing that I had, but I ended up writing actually after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And I wrote this thing, and I'm like, screw this, screw everybody, screw church, I'm out of here, right? And I get a call from my bishop. And it was a great conversation. I do remember that conversation. One of the things that I have learned in my witness during 2020 is who are the white people in my life that I can be angry with, or that I can be angry to. I think that there is all stereotypes are evil, but this stereotype of angry black man, and one of the things that I had to begin to ask myself is, who can I be angry with? who is going to see my anger and hear it for all that it's worth. And so, you know, in 2020, like, all of that's happening, and I'm getting ready for seminary. We are getting ready for seminary. And yeah, I mean, I just remember, and I've done all the reading, I've done all of the praying, and I was just like ready to do something with my anger. Like, I just needed to channel it somewhere. And some of that was through writing, some of that was through preaching, but that was a lot of my witness, was just a lot of anger and trying to figure out who can I be angry with, and where can I place this anger, and really what then can God do with my anger as a Black person who is living in 2020. I'm curious now, what has your witness in relationship with racial justice and reconciliation been like with kids?
It's been, like I said before, it's been a lot about identity. So as an African American woman, I have moved through a lot of white circles. And so I have faced a lot of microaggressions, and my students of color facing those microaggressions and seeing them face them in front of me and teaching them how to deal with those microaggressions, but then also calling out my white students, my white colleagues, especially when I see them perpetuating these microaggressions, and being able to say, this is not right, but saying it in a loving way. But then also reminding my students of color that they don't have to take those, and it's okay to say something about it, calling people out for it. It's okay to do it in a loving way. Sometimes you might not be able to be in the space of doing it in a loving way, but coming back and saying, you know, I'm sorry, what I said does not change, but the way that I said it probably would have been better. But really just going back to that identity and reminding everybody, well, reminding my students that, you know, whose image that they're made in, but then also reminding them that everyone else is also made in that image. And so how do you treat the person who is standing in front of you? Do you treat that person with love, or do you treat them as less than?
Can I briefly share the story of apologetics?
Yes.
Okay. And I love
Well, I like to.
Oh my goodness. So Yah and I are in a preaching class together. And Yah preaches a really wonderful baptism sermon. Yes, baptism sermon. And we all give her feedback, and our professor, who is a white man, is giving Yah feedback, and he goes, and you know, Yah, you know, you're so articulate. And like, as soon as he said that, like, red flag went up. Here we go. So after the feedback is done, I say, you know, Professor, articulate is not the compliment that you think it is for Yah. And he heard that and asked, okay, he apologized and said, well, what is a better word? And I said, clarity would be a best word, or a better word. But yes, I like, so here, the microaggressions, that like, not even, like outside of kids, but like, the power dynamics of having to do that with a white person who's also, you know, our professor. So.
I mean, we're a four-year school, right? So we have new students coming in as sophomores, juniors, and freshmen and graders. And so, and they're coming from everywhere. They're coming from international, they're coming domestic, they're kind of our population is kind of a smile across the United States, so we eke up a little bit into the northeast and New York, and then we swing down through the southeast across Texas and then up the California coast, and then a few kids from the Midwest. And so it is I miss St. Andrews in that way of like the ability to have a student from a young age. So it's a real colliding of bringing people in. And so folks are coming from schools where they have done a ton of education about all of these issues that we're wrestling with. And then students are coming from a place where they have done very little. And so we almost have to start over again and figuring out how we weave it into the life of the school so it isn't all, your identity isn't all that you are, but we recognize that it plays a really important part in how you engage with the world. And so having strong affinity spaces with adults who identify in those groups, leading those spaces, having those feel like spaces where, yeah, you can be you in this space. And that has been some of the most, I think, important work that's happened. Because I'm in a chaplain. I work with a team of adults, you know, and I feel really fortunate that I'm not the only one having to carry this load. So, you know, what speakers are we having coming in? How are we tackling things? What does our MLK symposium look like from year to year? What's the program that we're doing in classrooms? You know, how are we engaging off campus with DC and how all that is working and getting our kids out of the bubble that they can be in? And those have been, and I think the issue of representation has been really important, right? That I can be and work to be, and this work can always feel a little bit sus, you know, an ally and wanting to be that person, but that it means I also need to have voices of people who don't look like me in the pulpit, in music performance represented in all aspects of, I think, specifically the chapel program itself. Like, I was totally fortunate to have Ya as a seminary intern last year, Mitchell as a seminary intern this year, and others, to have students say, yes, I felt so heard, I felt so seen by that, let's have a visiting gospel director come in, let's do all of that work in a way that I don't want it to feel token, I want it to feel real, because it is who we are. You are a member of this community, and you need to see yourself represented in that way. You know, why don't I have more Black students in the best trade school, right? What is that about? So really asking some of those questions in a deeper way and engaging in more real conversation with students and adults has been, I think, the lifting of the work. But then also realizing my population in general is transient. They're gone, right? So how are we educating them about the very old history of the festival, and who we are and what we come from and what has been put into this ground and into these buildings by Black hands and Black bodies and Black hearts and Black minds. But then also, how are we treating each other right now? And that they're actually connected to each other, whether my 15, 16-year-old students understand that, and that they are actually choosing something, I think, that's incredibly becoming more and more rare, to come to a school, to be in a place with people who are different than they are, intentionally, on purpose. We sort each other to be with people who look like us and think like us and make the same money as us, all over the country, right? They're choosing to come to a place that's countercultural and they're buying in. And I regularly remind them of that. You're not just coming here because this is a lot better than the rural high school I've gone to in, you know, somewhere in Maryland, right? I'm coming here because it's near the city. You know, but no, you're choosing to come be a part of this community. And that means there are parts of that. The difficult parts of that are when there are students who struggle to live inside the expectations that we have, right? Like, I don't know whether you've kicked anyone out of St. Columbus, right? To say you can't be here anymore. Because of your behavior, that does happen in all communities. But there are students that we work really hard with, who even in the end, this is not a place where it feels like you're able to operate and be a productive member of this community, and you're causing pain to members of this community, and you're not able to be here anymore. And so how do I continue, because I tell the students, once I'm your chaplain, I'm always your chaplain. Like, that relationship will never change. And so how do I continue to be chaplain in that way? For that student and for the students who have been in.
Yeah, for myself, and then we're going to open up to questions that you may have. My witness to kids, I think about the Second Thessalonians where the writer says, "You have become so dear to us that we were not only willing to share the gospel, but our very lives." And for me, I had to learn to share the things that I process with my kids. So when a white teenage boy says, "Oh, look at her, she's pretty for a black girl," I get to respond and say, "You know, when you say that, that hurts me." In South Carolina, around conversations with Confederate monuments or the Confederate flag. And so being willing and really trusting God and being vulnerable to say, that hurts, or I'm confused, or here's how I see it. I think the vulnerability and the grace to invite someone into what, for me as a black person who hears and sees the world in a different way, I think is what was my witness. It still is. It's learning how the things that I process and the words that I have, how I invite people to see those and share those with other people. It's tough, because I can get hurt again. And yet, I think that is one faithful way to do so. That's how I choose to do it.
And similarly, I will talk about my own work, and that it's intentional work. And you'll sometimes I'll see my students' faces and go, yeah, that's a nice grill.
We got 20 clean minutes for questions and answers. You guys have any questions for us? Just raise your hand and we'll point into a call. Yes.
So when you're working with kids, because kids have lots of different ways they self-identify. And how do you work with kids to make them respectful of all those different ways that people are self-identifying, but not starting to stereotype people within those different categories? So how do they learn history and differences and respect for different categories of people without starting to think, oh, this is the stereotype of that type of person, or the diversity within whatever the identity is? If you're a black 18-year-old high school senior, okay, there's going to be a whole array of those kind of people. How do you get them to not start trying to be, sometimes I'm worried in the effort to fight racism, the easiest place to do is to go to a stereotype. And then you latch on that stereotype. It's part of your effort to fight racism, so how do you get the kids to recognize the diversity within each one of these identities?
There's a lot of empathy work. I'll work with students to share their stories in chapel talks that occur throughout the year, and the ability to share that story and now say, well, now you know my story. So this will and my story is not everybody's story. And I also have to emphasize that with them. Like, you're not up here speaking for every, trans student in the world. Like, that is not your job. Or every black female high school senior in the world. And I think the more opportunities we give students to share those stories in ways that feel safe for them, it takes the stereotype out, because there's too many stories. I think I'm a big pop culture person and TV person, and I think the more the diversity of stories that are being told now, it just changes. Things can't be one note anymore. I do think particularly of our students who identify as LGBTQ in our community, that continues to be an area where people may feel alone. The affinity space shows them that they're not, but kind of for many of my students, coming out is not a thing anymore. I just am me. I don't need to make this elaborate gesture to tell everybody I'm just living life in the way that I am. And I think being at a boarding school, the idea that you can live down the hall from everybody, it changes things for the students. And I think particularly for my white students who are curious about people from different racial backgrounds, how do they engage with that curiosity, but not have it be the only conversation I'm having with God is about her hair, and I really want to know all about it, and can you tell me about it while I'm trying to get ready for class today? Just really inform me and teach me, my darker skinned friend, right? That how do we do some of that work? Because some of it's going to happen naturally to the at least in my context, but not always have our black and brown brothers and sisters have to be teachers.
Any other questions? We actually have until 11 o'clock, so
Oh.
I'd love to get more time for questions if there aren't any.
Could you talk a little bit about everything that's happening in our country, about books being banned, reluctance to acknowledge our history? How are you kind of conveying to the kids, what position to take on that, how to deal with that?
Yeah, we're a diverse at all levels school, I would say. We have alums who are very concerned about, how are you teaching this? Are you telling people that America is bad? Like those sorts of fears and concerns. And that we kind of, at least I find myself as a teacher situating myself in that acknowledging who we are and where we come from, and the good and the bad of all of that for me is just life. That's living. That idea that because I know more about the history of my country now than I did when I was in high school, does that make me less glad that I am American? It doesn't. I think it becomes more gray. The black and the white, you have to live into the gray. And I think for a developing teenage mind, that can be hard because you want answers. You want, how does this work? Is it this? Is it that? Which one is it? Is good, bad? I want definition. And it is hard to live into the question and not always be so focused on the answer. But it is this element of, being an independent school, we're not as beholden to some of those things, but that it's important to know where we come from. When we say that, you need to know where you come from so you don't repeat it. You need to know these things about who we are as a country, as a school, to be able to acknowledge that. But does that diminish other aspects, right? We also have an international community. So there's this element of other students who are coming out and choosing to come to high school in the United States. Like, this is interesting, I'm into this. And people who are able to look at Americans from the outside and be like, what are you doing over there? What's that about? And that perspective in the classroom and a lot of making sure there's space for that is super interesting. I used to have my biblical theology classes, tons of kids coming in with experiences from traditions that they've grown up with. It's now about 75% kids coming from some religious background, but then that means there's a whole bunch of kids who are coming from none. And so that actually, it changes the nature of the conversation. I'm not dealing with baggage from before. We're now talking about something that's wholly new to you. You have no idea what's going on. So I feel like I'm rambling. But it's tough because I think as teachers we stand on the side of wanting more education and wanting our students to have access to things. And it's very frustrating that gets labeled as liberal. That I'm being somehow political and wanting my students to have access to the information industry. And I think that's very frustrating. And I think then it does set up, and you may even be experiencing this in your own children's school or grandchildren's school, that it does feel like, the faculty's on this side. So, so that I think that people want to draw you into those dichotomies. And I try not to. In my position.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Joel, how do you think that, how do you think that we in our community can support our young people and the people who are working with our young people in the conversation of reparation and open-heartedness to people's anger and space?
There's the story of the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, and I think it's probably the most beautiful line in all the Gospels, where it says she told him her whole truth, and she told him her whole stories. In some of the other translations. I think not just macro U.S. history, but also being able to name our own histories as people who are Black and white. I think that's the best way. Not the only way, but I think spaces like this. I think our church being open to reparations. At the church, at my home parish in South Carolina, this would not be a thing. There are a lot of people at that church that fought really hard to get a racial justice library. Conversation on racism or on reparations would be kind of, a whole other world. So I think being able for me to say, this is my story as a Black man, Betsy, and for Betsy to honor that and to believe it. For me to hear Betsy's story as a white woman, for me to honor that and believe it, and then ask, where might the Spirit be moving us forward to together? I think that's one way we can do that. Yeah.
I think being honest about your own transformation and change, your own struggles that you've had. I think we hear a lot of talk, we heard a lot of talk during the pandemic about resiliency and how do we tell our family history, tell our personal history to our young people so that then when things happen, there's a narrative of, oh, well, this is something that, other people have lived through something similar or have surmounted something, and being honest about that. For me, the biblical story, it's so interesting, it's all healings, right? So the Syrophoenician woman is where I always go, and it's this woman who pushes back against Jesus and is not Jewish and says, my daughter is possessed, she's sick, please heal her. And he basically calls her a dog. He says, I'm not here for you, I'm here for the children. And she says, no, we're here for it too. We've heard about you, we're into this kingdom of God thing. And he goes, for saying that you may go, and then there's this M dash, this moment of transformation I feel, and then he's like, the demon has left your daughter. And it's like, there's this change that happens there. And I don't feel that somehow makes Jesus, humanity of Jesus. He's changing. He's seeing that his mission is maybe bigger than he thought it was, or beyond what he could imagine. And so it means inviting other people in. And so I think being honest about that this work is hard, and I don't know whether it will happen in my lifetime, the vision I have, but that we are a part of doing it now. And I'm very much not this young people of the future kind of person. It's now. And we've seen that in our streets, in our classrooms, over the past few years for sure.
Any final words?
So I recently learned the phrase windows and mirrors. And so to your question about books and how to teach kids, so I learned it at Beauvoir, and they view books as a window into other cultures, into other lives, into that exposure. So it's hearing stories, but it's not just listening to one particular story. It's exposing your kids to all different types of stories, taking them to places that they might not have ever thought about going, introducing them to people, introducing them to cultures and foods, so that way when they do come into contact with something that they don't know, they're not fearful, but they are curious. And I think that is important, is this curiosity, is this desire to ask questions. And I think oftentimes, especially now that we're coming against book banning, it's the fear of asking questions. It's that fear of the unknown. And the more that you don't know, the more that you are afraid. And so being able to embolden our kids to ask questions, to be curious, to be able to go up to a stranger and ask in a respectful way, to get to hear their stories and get to know them. But then it's also taking a mirror and looking at ourselves, looking at what we're doing, the work that we're doing. Are we curious about ourselves? Are we acknowledging the faults that we have within ourselves? And until we're able to fully balance those two, I think that we will always be striving to follow the example of Jesus. And so,
Will you please join me in giving Betsy and a hand? Thank you all for coming. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.